Presumably, you welcome the £7 billion worth of investment, which incidentally is going to benefit your constituency in Leeds.
Well, let's hope so. But what we see from this government is lots of announcements and much less delivery. Northern Powerhouse Rail, that would benefit Leeds and Bradford and Manchester and other towns and cities across Yorkshire, was first announced 7 years ago. It's been announced 60 times since then, and there's still not a single spade in the ground or train on the rails. It's not good enough. And the government are going to make more announcements this week. But we're sick of, in the north, having announcements without the delivery on the ground. And we want to see concrete action to match the rhetoric of this government. That's really important for all of us in the north of England.
But your Labour colleagues, Tracy Brabin and Andy Burnham, have been rather positive about this announcement. In fact, Andy Burnham said yesterday, this is not a day for negativity. Aren't you being a bit mean?
Well, of course, new money is welcome, but as I say, Trevor, it's got to be backed up with actual action. And Northern Powerhouse Rail, the eastern leg of HS2, the dismal state that many of our bus services in, with cuts over the last few years and higher fares, all of those things need addressing. And it's of course welcome always to have more investment, but if that investment isn't backed up with actual delivery, it's really not worth the paper it's written on. And that is the frustration in many towns and cities across the north of England, that while big grand projects get delivered elsewhere in the country, they're few and far between in our towns and cities. And Northern Powerhouse Rail, I think, is the best example of a huge gaping chasm now between the rhetoric of the government and the actual delivery for people on the ground.
OK, well, look, would you give a tick at least to the 500 million for early years education, which is a thing I know from your parliamentary career that you care about quite a lot?
Well, I just would say to the Chancellor, have you ever heard of Sure Start? Because that is what your governments over the last 11 years have cut. And it's all well and good saying we're going to invest in these family parks, but thousands of children's centres and Sure Start centres that were proud features of our communities, especially some of our poorest communities, have long gone. And Tessa Jowell and Harriet Harman and Yvette Cooper and others in previous Labour governments who made those happen, I think there's a real feeling that if you hadn't have taken all that away, imagine what difference it could have made to the lives of young people and to their parents. And this pale imitation, which doesn't even take us back to where we were in 2010, I think is an insult to all those people who created investment and made Sure Start happen in the first place. And it was such a proud achievement of the last Labour government. And it really was an act of criminality to rip that all up, only to now, 11 years later, create a pale imitation of it.
I am frequently saying to you and your colleagues, what would you do? And complaining that you don't give me an answer. But in fact, this morning, you've already said that you would cut VAT on domestic energy supplies at a cost, you estimate, of £1 billion. I think that's interesting. Who's going to tell Andy Burnham that if you were Chancellor, he wouldn't be getting the transport improvements, which coincidentally cost about £1 billion, because you want to spend it on energy?
Well, no one would have to say that to Andy Burnham. I would say to Andy Burnham, we'll invest in the transport in Greater Manchester and across the north of England and give you the powers to do that, because too many decisions are still made in Whitehall and Westminster and not in the towns and cities and regions of our country. And we want to devolve more powers to Andy, to Tracy, to Dan Jarvis and to our other great metro mayors around the country. We've been clear about how we would pay for this cut in VAT, but let me just say why it's so important. But people are facing now a tough winter, with the prices of everything going up, not least our gas and electricity bills, and everybody is feeling the pinch. When we pay our gas and electricity bills each month, 5% of that bill goes directly to the taxman. And what Labour are saying is let's reduce that rate of VAT on gas and electricity bills from 5% to 0% for 6 months to get us through this winter period. And that would be an immediate and automatic reduction to the bills of every single family and pensioner across our country. And we would pay for that by using the VAT receipts that have come in higher than forecast by over £2 billion over the last 2 months, not least because prices are so much higher than they were forecast. Let's use that additional revenue that has flowed into the Treasury these last few months to make that important reduction in VAT on gas and electricity bills to ease that pressure on people who are struggling right now with the rising cost of living at the same time that taxes are going up.
But I suspect that extra money has already been allocated elsewhere in the Chancellor's plan. So if you're not going to find it from Andy's money or Tracy Brabin's 830 million or the 830 million for the FE skills budget or T-levels, where is this actually going to... Or is this the magic money tree turning up again?
Trevor, you're asking me what Labour would do if it was our budget on Wednesday. And our priority would be easing the cost of living crisis, helping businesses who have had a torrid 18 months, and addressing some of the long-term challenges that we face with the climate crisis, but also our plans to buy, make and sell more in Britain. And if it was our budget on Wednesday, we would be using those additional VAT receipts to cut VAT on gas and electricity bills, because we know what a difficult time so many families and also pensioners are facing.
But if I may say so,
with worries about rising prices and worries about rising gas and electricity bills. And that is Labour's priority, and that is what Labour would do at the budget.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chancellor, but last time you were on, you told me that you would abolish business rates at a stroke. That will cost £25 billion. OK, you might be able to find a little bit of underspending and so on, but it's not going to count to £25 billion. You haven't got the money.
On business rates, what we've said is that next year, instead of increasing business rates, like this government planned to do, we would freeze business rates for all and we would extend the small business rates relief. And we would pay for that by increasing the digital services tax on firms who have done well these last 18 months as people's spending patterns have changed. That would bring in just over £2 billion, and that would enable us to freeze rates and extend small business rates relief. But we know these problems run deeper than just some tinkering around the edges in 1 year only. And that's why Labour have committed to abolish business rates and replace it with a fairer form of business property taxation. What do I mean by that? First of all, I mean
very
that
briefly,
high street
if you
companies
wouldn't
and
mind.
small businesses, the high street businesses and small businesses shouldn't have to bear such a disproportionate burden of business rates. Out-of-town warehouses, for example, are taxed at a much lower rate than high street businesses. But we've also got a situation where some of our big digital companies are not paying corporation tax in this country. The global minimum rate of corporation tax, the receipts from that, should ease the burden of business rates on high street and small businesses. That would be Labour's priority.